Greetings, YouTube. As a quick aside, does anyone know how to access the old style subscription format? I went to use it today because that's the one I prefer, and I can't access it, not in 3 different browsers. So I'm curious if you could access it at all any longer. I would really appreciate knowing that. Thanks. Recently, I think it might have been last weekend, Cenk over on the Young Turks did a video where he talked about institutionalized racism, and he made a quick aside about affirmative action. And I've been thinking about what he said since then. And the institutionalized racist comment dealt with the economic growth of both black and white people in the United States over a course of time and where they lived. Now, during the period between 1955 and 1970, counting the top 60% of the white community, that's, middle class and the wealthy. Of that top 60% of the white community, 1% of them lived in poor areas. And poor areas are being described as areas where 20% of the population lives at or below the poverty line. There are places in America where the percentage is much higher than that, but they are considered severely poor communities. Now, during that same time period, 55 to 70, amongst the black community, the top 60% of the wage earners, and again, that's middle class and upper class, 49% of those top wage earners lived in poor communities because they couldn't move out of their communities into the more affluent communities because institutionalized racism wouldn't let them. All right, so now we jump forward to 85 to 2000, another 15-year span. I have no idea why they did 15-year spans, but they did in the study. And of the top 60% earners in the white community, 6% lived in poor communities. And of the 60% of the black community, 66% of them lived in poor communities. That's the top wage earners. That's the top 60% of the economic bracket for the black community. So that's pretty telling. That there still doesn't seem to be a lot of mobility out of poor communities for the black folks of our nation, and yet the white community doesn't seem to have a problem with that at all. I wonder why. And he made a comment that he felt that affirmative action should be based on class and not race. Which got me thinking. He's got a point. A valid point. So, I'm going to throw an idea out there. I have not done studies on this. I am not an economist. But this is just a rough back-of-the-envelope concept. You take the top 60 bracket that we've just been discussing so far. And you say, if you fall into that top 60 bracket, and you have for the last 10 consecutive years, you were not eligible for the affirmative action laws. Alright? But if you fall outside that bracket, and you have done so for the last 10 consecutive years, I think a 10-year time span is good. If you have had economic success for 10 consecutive years in a row, that should mean that you are now out of that bracket into the higher bracket, in my opinion. So, say if you've been in the lower bracket, 40%, for 10 or more years, consecutive years, then you are eligible. It doesn't matter you're white, you're brown, you're yellow, you're red, you're blue, you're green, you're plaid, you're black. It doesn't matter. If you are in that 40% bracket, you are eligible for affirmative action. Not only do I think that this would help everyone, and it would mean that the white supremacists could stop complaining that affirmative action only helps people that isn't them. But it would also help college students and people out of high school. Help maybe lift them up. And I would build a sundown feature into this law so that when the percentage difference between the top 60 and the bottom 40, say, got within 2 points, the law would no longer be needed because we would have finally lifted everyone into the middle class bracket. There would still be a small percentage of people that were poor. And we would do everything we could to fix that, but there has to be some kind of margin there, and that's the margin that I think that would be useful. If we only had 2 to 3% of our population living in poverty, that would be awesome. It would, because we could still make sure that there were policies in place that they did not have the lack for food or shelter or education or health care. We could make sure that they did not fall into destitution. So this is the idea that I've come up with. So I need to ask people, what do you think? Do you think that we could change the affirmative action laws based on class and not based on race? Now, some very smart people in the world have pointed out that if, for example, Roosevelt, because the people in charge of capitalism have organized, the businesses, then it only makes sense that the labor organizes as well. Martin Luther King Jr. was talking about class when they killed him. Eisenhower knew that the military-industrial complex was the enemy of the American people. All right, and that type of business arrangement has just gotten worse, not better, since his era. Labor needs to organize. Labor needs to make sure that we pull as many people as we can out of the poverty and into the middle class, and potentially even wealth. Because there's a difference between money and wealth, folks. So I want to know, do you think that affirmative action would function as a class-based system as opposed to one based on race? And if it does, do you think that the less liberal factions in America would finally accept affirmative action as a viable option, as something that's helping America overall? Because I think we still need it. And I just think we need to change it slightly to help everyone based on class rather than race. So tell me, what do you think?